Hello and welcome to Mr. C History. It is October, Black History Month. Now I've made a couple of videos for Black History Month before, but today I want to focus on the tale of a footballer, hence why I'm by this large football stadium. This particular footballer is Walter Tull, a true trailblazer. He was the second black player to play professionally in Britain and crucially the first black serving officer in the British Army. Now his story is a tremendous tale of success and achievement over adversity, and sadly all ends in tragedy. So join me now on the story of Walter Tull. Behind me is number 19 Walton Road in Folkestone, and on April the 28th, 1888, Walter Tull was born in this house. Now he was one of 6, and his father Daniel had come from Barbados. Extraordinarily, Walter's grandfather, Daniel's father, was actually a slave, and indeed Daniel, Walter Tull's father, was born into slavery. He became free after that. Extraordinary. Now, Walter's mother, Elizabeth, died when Walter was just 7 years old, and then 2 years later, Daniel, Walter's father, also died. So a really tragic, difficult early childhood. And indeed his stepmother could not look after him and his brother, so him and his brother were sent up to London, to Bethnal Green. Now Walter and his brother Edward were brought here to Bethnal Green Orphanage specifically. It was known as the Methodist Children's Home. Sadly it doesn't exist anymore, but it's sort of a big patch of land where it was replaced by this modern building. But some of these older buildings would have still been there, and indeed if you just look through the fences you can see some of the older Victorian walls. Now he obviously came here with his brother because his father and his mother died very quickly in quick succession. And then it gets worse for Walter. His brother Edward gets adopted by a family from Glasgow, so he has to move there. So really quickly, Walter is all of a sudden on his own. Incidentally, Edward Tull, his brother, he goes on to become Britain's first black dentist. So this family and their achievements is absolutely incredible. Now you're probably going to think I'm going to say life was really awful, conditions were awful here for Walter. Now obviously yes, the separation and the loneliness, as I've described, yes, but actually he got his basic education, he was fed, and most importantly, he was encouraged to play football. It has, and it still does, it had then a very big yard where he could go and practice and hone his skills. And soon enough he was playing football, specifically for Clapton FC, which still exists in its amateur form just up the way there in East London. And whilst he was playing for them, they won the Amateur FA Cup, they won the London Cup, they were unstoppable, and he indeed was the fulcrum of that team. So pretty much soon all the big clubs will be knocking on the door ready to sign him. And one of those clubs, of course, was Tottenham Hotspur, who Walter signed for in the summer of 1909. And indeed, one of the first things they did as soon as he signed is they went on a tour of South America. It must have taken them ages to get there on the boat. But that's very interesting because this meant that Walter Tull was the first black man to play professionally football on the continent of South America, because black people in South America at the time were barred. They didn't have a professional league structure. So there is achievement number 1. And indeed he started the season with Tottenham Hotspur extraordinarily well. He was playing in the position of inside forward, whatever that might possibly mean, and he was marauding, making great runs, and indeed one of the main footballing newspapers at the time, the Football Star, considered him one of the best signings ever. A real steal is how he was described. And he was scoring goals, and most importantly he was creating goals, setting them up. Unfortunately though, a significant incident happened on October the 4th, 1909. Tottenham Hotspur were playing away at Bristol City, Ashton Gate, and Walter Tull was subjected to horrific racist abuse from the home fans, the Bristol City fans. He carried on playing, obviously, because he was stoicness, but this was 1909, don't forget. Racism in football, and sadly, has got a long and powerful history, and it's got a little bit better, of course, over time, but 1909, it was the norm, it was rampant, and Walter was obviously at the forefront, being one of the first black players ever to play in the league. Now the Daily Football, the Football Star, the newspaper, was not happy about this. They said the language was lower than Billingsgate, and it heavily criticised the fans and saying it's outrageous, and they highlighted that Walter actually was the best player on the pitch, and you're criticising the best player on the pitch. Very, very excoriating review. Unfortunately though, the powers that be at Tottenham Hotspur didn't quite agree, and in their infinite cowardice they decided to apologise to Bristol City for fielding this player, and they demoted Walter to the reserves. Outrageous behaviour at the time. Just around the back of Tottenham Stadium is a blue plaque to Walter actually, and it's on the site where he lived when he was here when he was playing, really close to the stadium. As always though, they're doing roadworks, so I'm just going to go somewhere quiet to tell you the tale of him in the reserves. Now in early 1911, Northampton Town, who were the division below Tottenham Hotspur, they came to play the Tottenham reserves and they lose 7-1. And 4 of those 7 goals were scored by, you guess it, our man Walter Tull. Now the manager of Northampton Town, a man called Herbert Chapman, was so impressed that he offered Tottenham a substantial fee, and sure enough, Walter moved to Northampton Town. Incidentally, Herbert Chapman goes on to become the significant manager of Arsenal in the 1920s and really shapes that football team. Before that, manager of Northampton Town and Walter Tull. Now the fans of Northampton Town welcome Walter with open arms, and he responds. He plays in the position of wing half, whatever that might be, plays 111 times for them, scores lots of goals, creates many. He's renowned for his pace and his ability to tackle and pass the ball through. He was an absolute trailblazer in football, and he gets Northampton, or he helps to get Northampton Town pushed to the top division. A great, great player. And indeed, by 1914, Glasgow Rangers, one of the biggest clubs in Britain at the time, they come knocking on the door wanting to sign Walter. On the 14th of April 1912, Walter Tull scored 4 goals against Bristol Rovers here at Northampton Town. That, interestingly as well, was the day before the Titanic sank. I'm in Mill Hill in North London, or in the area that used to be known as Middlesex, and indeed behind me is memorial to the Middlesex Regiment. This, of course, was the regiment which Walter signed up to in December of 1914. Specifically, he joined the 17th Brigade, otherwise known as the Footballers' Regiment. Yes, indeed, this is World War I, of course. There were Palisbury battalions, and obviously the other battalions and brigades of people from different industries. There was a Footballers' one, and he signed up in December of 1914. Now, he signed up as a private, but of course, this being Walter, he fought with great bravery and sophistication, and by 1916 he'd been promoted to sergeant, an incredible rank to achieve for a person of colour at the time. And indeed he fought in the infamous Battle of the Somme, horrendous losses. He was deep in the trenches. The horrific nature of the fighting led to him having to come back to Britain suffering from shell shock. He convalesced here for a time, but eventually did go back to fight in the First World War, specifically in Italy. But not only did he go back, he also went back under a new promotion, specifically that of second lieutenant, an officer. Now this is significant, of course, because he is the first person of colour to become an officer in the British Army. This is because it was illegal. It was not allowed for a person of colour to become an officer. The British Army had a racist rule whereby people who are of non-European heritage could not become that rank. There was this outdated belief that white men would not take orders from a black man. But Walter Tull completely proved that wrong and was able to convince, or indeed the officers themselves, his commanding officers, were able to see that this was not true. And indeed he did lead his men very gallantly all the time. He fought in Italy, then he was brought back to fight once again in the Second Battle of the Somme in 1918. Now this was a time, March of 1918 was when Germany was at its lowest ebb. They thought, we just need one last push, a spring offensive to try and see if we can take the war. They of course end up losing, but unfortunately many British soldiers are killed in the wake, including Walter Tull. He was of course leading a charge. He is shot and killed. There were attempts to try and get his body off the battlefield. Indeed, the goalkeeper from Leicester City, in his footballers battalion, tried his best to get his body off so they could send it back to Britain, but sadly he was hit away by the bullets. So Walter is like many thousands and thousands of British soldiers, died in the mud and is still there in northern France. He is memorialised in Arras in northern France, so I think you can go see his name there. But again, what an amazing trailblazer. The first black officer in the British Army died gallantly, leading his men. He did all of this and the footballing achievements, he did it all before the age of 29. He dies at age 29. An incredible story. This is the memorial of Walter Tull at Northampton Town Stadium, Sixfield Stadium. And there's some lovely words written here by Phil Vasili, who is the main biographer of Walter Tull, has written several books about him. And on the inscription it says, "Through his actions, W.D.J. Tull ridiculed the barriers of ignorance that tried to deny people of colour equality with their contemporaries. His life stands testament to determination to confront those people and those obstacles that sought to diminish him and the world in which he lived. Reveals a man, though rendered breathless in his prime, whose strong heart still beats loudly." Very, very good words there for Walter. I hope you have enjoyed that story, Walter Tull. Please go and find out more. There's more intricacies to his story, I'm sure. Fascinating figure. Please make sure you go and subscribe. Watch the other ones, my other Black History Month videos from last year. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.